On a cold winter evening in 1919, the people of Boston gathered as usual near the busy harbor district, unaware that beneath the wooden structures around them rested a giant tank of industrial molasses whose aging metal skin had been ignored for years. Workers had complained about strange groans from the tank, but the company dismissed the warnings, insisting everything was safe as long as production continued to rise. The massive tank, more than 50 feet tall, had been built quickly during wartime demand, its seams poorly riveted and its structure rarely inspected. Residents living nearby joked about how the tank always leaked sticky syrup along its sides, never realizing that these leaks were signs of growing internal pressure. Inside, thousands of tons of warm molasses were fermenting, expanding against the cold steel walls. That afternoon, as the temperature suddenly dropped, the warm molasses inside the tank cooled rapidly, increasing pressure on the brittle steel plates. The structure let out loud pops, like distant gunshots, frightening horses on the street and causing passers-by to pause and look around nervously, though none knew where the sound came from. Moments later, a thunderous crack split the air as the entire tank burst open with explosive force, launching steel fragments through the neighborhood. A dark, roaring wave of molasses surged out, towering nearly 15 feet high, moving faster than a person could run. People screamed as the sticky flood swallowed homes, crushed buildings, and swept away anything in its path. Horses, wagons, and entire sections of the elevated railway collapsed under the heavy surge. Witnesses described the sound as a freight train mixed with rushing water, yet thicker and stranger than anything they'd ever seen. Molasses flooded alleys and streets so quickly that even strong men struggled to pull themselves free from the sticky trap. Police officers at the nearby station heard the deafening explosion and rushed outside, only to see the strange brown wave racing toward them. They barely had time to brace themselves as the flood smashed into the building, shattering windows and hurling officers across the room. Some were pinned under furniture as the syrup hardened around them. In nearby homes, families were thrown against walls as floors buckled under the force. Mothers grabbed children and tried to flee, but the molasses trapped their feet and dragged them down. Survivors would later recall the terrifying feeling of being stuck while the liquid slowly rose around their bodies. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but their equipment became useless as engines got stuck in the thick goo. Hoses tangled and ladders sank into the syrup. Men waded chest deep, pulling trapped victims out with ropes because they couldn't walk without sinking deeper into the sweet-smelling disaster. The flood carried debris, chunks of metal, broken beams, shattered carts, turning it into a deadly mixture. Some victims were hit by flying wreckage while others suffocated as the syrup clogged their mouths and noses. Even strong swimmers found themselves helpless, as the density of the molasses prevented any movement. When the wave finally stopped, the neighborhood was unrecognizable. Streets looked like they had been coated in dark mud. Buildings lay crushed. People were scattered among piles of debris. Rescue teams struggled to move because every step felt like walking through glue. By evening, the cold weather caused the syrup to thicken even more, making rescue efforts nearly impossible. Firefighters lit lanterns to search through the debris, listening for faint cries from survivors. The once busy waterfront fell silent except for the muffled sounds of workers digging through the sticky rubble. Volunteers from across the city arrived with shovels, planks, and ropes, fighting through exhaustion as they freed trapped people. Horses were pulled from the hardened molasses with teams of men dragging with all their strength. The smell of molasses filled the entire region, overwhelming residents for miles. Doctors set up emergency tents nearby and treated victims suffering from broken bones, crushed limbs, and suffocation injuries. The syrup had trapped dust, dirt, and splinters, causing infections. Medical workers cleaned wounds for hours, their gloves coated in sticky residue they could not fully remove. Reporters rushed to the scene, stunned by the scale of destruction. They described the disaster as something unreal, a nightmare made of sugar. Newspapers across America published headlines calling it the molasses flood, shocking readers who could hardly believe something so unusual could be so deadly. As the cleanup continued, investigators discovered that the tank owner had ignored multiple warnings from workers who reported groaning noises and daily leaks. The company had painted the tank brown to hide the leakage, choosing appearance over safety, and causing public anger once these details were revealed. Survivors testified about the smell of syrup in the air just minutes before the explosion, and how birds flew away in confusion as the ground trembled. Their powerful testimonies helped reveal that the disaster was man-made, caused by negligence rather than an unforeseeable accident. Crews brought pumps, shovels, and even saltwater from the harbor to wash the streets. For weeks, workers scrubbed walls, sidewalks, and rooftops stained with sticky molasses. Businesses complained of ruined goods, and workers' clothes became permanently stiff from the dried syrup. Cleanup workers tracked molasses everywhere they went, onto trolleys, into restaurants, and even into their homes. The smell lingered for months, and some residents claimed they could taste sweetness in the air long after the flood had dried. The city held the company responsible, leading to one of the longest and most expensive legal battles in Boston's history. Lawyers argued over engineering faults, pressure buildup, and ignored warnings. Witnesses described flying debris, drowning victims, and the overwhelming force of the wave. Engineers brought in by the court concluded that the tank had been rushed into service, built with substandard steel that cracked easily. Had it been inspected properly, the court ultimately ruled that the company was liable, ordering them to pay massive compensation to the victims' families. This ruling changed the way industrial safety was handled across America, setting new expectations for structural testing and regular inspections. The neighborhood slowly rebuilt over the next few years. New buildings rose where the destroyed homes once stood. Streets were repaved, and the elevated railway was repaired. Yet many residents claimed the smell of molasses never fully disappeared. Survivors carried emotional scars, recalling nights when they woke to the imagined sound of rushing syrup. Children who lived through the disaster grew up telling vivid stories of the day the streets turned brown and the world tasted sweet and deadly. Newspapers later tracked many survivors who moved away, trying to escape the memory of the flood. Some refused to speak about it, while others shared their stories so the world would remember how a simple food ingredient became a force of destruction. Historians documented the event as an example of industrial negligence, using it as a warning for future generations. The disaster became part of Boston's legacy, remembered not just for its odd nature but for the tragic loss of life it caused. Today, visitors to the area walk on smooth pavement that hides the past devastation. A small plaque honors the victims and recounts the strange but deadly event. People are often surprised to learn that molasses could destroy a neighborhood so quickly. Locals still share stories passed down from grandparents who witnessed the flood. They describe the chaos, the dark wave, and the brave rescue efforts. Each retelling ensures the memory of that day remains alive, even a century later. Scientists study the disaster to understand fluid dynamics better, noting how temperature and pressure changes caused the syrup to behave like an unstoppable force. Their findings helped improve safety standards for storage tanks nationwide. The molasses flood stands as a reminder that even small mistakes in engineering can create massive tragedies. The lessons learned from this incident shaped future regulations, protecting countless communities from similar industrial failures. As the years passed, the memory of the flood became part of American history, a strange mixture of sweetness and sorrow. The people of Boston rebuilt, but they never forgot the day a wave of molasses turned their world upside down and reminded the nation of the importance of safety, responsibility, and listening to early warnings.